All right. Whoop, wrong slide. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming out today. I know you're probably tired from all these technical talks, so I'm going to give you a bit of a break. Think of it as maybe a bit of an intermission. I don't have a talk going into the deep technicals of multi-agent orchestration or how to deploy applications into enterprise, but I am going to give you some mental frameworks, hopefully to get you into a bit of an automation mindset. Give you the language to talk to your team about this. And for the builders out there, we've built a lot of really fascinating stuff under the hood. So if I have some time at the end, I'll be talking about how we did some of that. I always like engaging the audience a little bit. Would love a raise of hands really quick on just, and you can raise your hand for both, whether you are here to learn about how to use AI, either for yourself or for your organization. Can I get a raise of hands? Okay, versus maybe building it more for others, whether as projects or founder. Great, okay, so about an equal split, perfect. So a little bit about me. This is my second startup. My last one was custom home building, and that was a bit of a detour because most of my career was spent working with AI and the whole data space at large. This was back in, let's say, 2012 or so when I started training my own models, getting my own data, scraping it, or downloading CSVs from the internet, and it was really fun. And that's a joke because it was actually really awful. And nowadays things are much easier. Everything's an API way. You can build a lot of really fascinating stuff. But it wasn't always that case. And some of those skills do transfer, but we're in the golden area. There's a lot to build, so many new possibilities that hopefully I can show you a few, but it's a lot easier now. So just hold tight. Respell, quick TLDR on us. We do AI automation. So most of that comes into workflows. I'm going to be defining what a workflow is in a moment. But that is anything structured you do day-to-day work. You can compile most things you do into a workflow. Checking email, responding to messages, even coding. There are workflows to that. Generating something creative. Everything's a workflow. And my goal is to give you rough mental framework on how to think about how to break it down and actually use AI for it. There's lots of pros and cons and things it can and cannot do. We started about a year ago, and one of the first things that we had to deal with was, what does it look like? How do we get AI into people's hands who have never heard of it before? And even today, we still get people who, they tell me, I've just found out about ChatGPT, like, how do I use this to do things? And to me, I've been in a space, so it's incredible to hear that anybody has just heard about ChatGPT. But that is the reality for most businesses. They still don't know. And you have to have the right way to pitch it to folks in order to make it click in their heads. So talk about form is the first thing. This is my schema. You may have a different one. And these are also fuzzy boundaries. But I like to think that there's roughly 4 types of AI that you can use day to day. Everyone knows what a chatbot is. ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Bing Chat, or whatever they call it now, and also agents and like the GPT store. We know what a chatbot is. It's free-form conversation, and some problems fit really well in a conversational interface. Some are terrible for it, though. Like, I don't want to. I want to have a back and forth conversation if I'm trying to do something creative. I don't have maybe the specifications in my head on exactly what I want to do. Maybe if I'm writing a story, for example, suggest to me some ideas. I'll correct you or pick a choice. But I don't want to argue with my computer on every website that I go to. And so I think the natural tendency to reach for a chatbot as the end-all be-all solution for interfaces, make sure you know your other options. The 2 next ones, micro apps and automations, they're very similar. And I'm all about workflows. That's what I think about day in, day out, and what I dream about most likely. But there's one difference between them, which is whether they're initiated by you or whether initiated by some other external event. So a workflow is just kind of a structured sequence of steps. And if I'm answering an email, well, I have to think about the context in that email. I have to decide, if it's a yes or no kind of thing, how I want to respond. And I got to actually write it and click send, right? That's, let's say, 4 steps. And if I wanted to automate that, I could with AI nowadays. Previously, it was pretty hard because there's a lot of thinking involved. But you can offload that now. And so that's something you could automate. And a micro app, on the other hand, is maybe something like writing a story. Maybe if I don't want to do a chatbot, I want something, my template for give me my story idea generator. That's a micro app. It can do a lot of the thinking, but I'm the one that triggers it because I have a thought one day. I'm like, I want to write a story. There's no external stimulus there. And then finally, there's embedded AI. This is kind of the wild card category. Every tool is building in AI, Notion AI Assistant, Canva and Figma. They have AI features now. Every website is scrambling to get some kind of AI in there, and it takes different forms, but you can't affect that. You have to be in there as a developer to build it. So that's something that, as a user, you might want to be aware of, but if you're building something, you can't affect that. Now let's talk about function. Again, high level, the schema may not work for everybody, but the top use cases that we see for workflows are pretty clear, and there's definitely a very strong drop-off after these four. Research, generation, analysis, and decision-making. Decision-making is the odd one out, which I'll spend a bit more time on that. Research is, I think it's probably the most common workflows that we see at Respell, is people research. It takes an absurd amount of time to when, let's say, a new applicant comes into your company or a new contact signs up for your website. Somebody new, you want to know who they are, you want to grab their attention, you got to do some research on them. Those are by far the most popular automations on Respell. And a very close second is generation. I don't think I need to spend much time here because it's called generative AI. Everyone knows that we can create text, we can write code, we can generate images and sometimes videos too. So that's a pretty obvious one. Analysis is tricky. And I don't even talk to customers about analysis because it means something different to people. When you say analysis nowadays, a lot of folks think, oh, big data. I can just toss a 30,000 row CSV into my AI model, and it's going to fix everything that I want it to do. It can crunch the numbers, calculate some complex things. That's not how it works. So analysis really comes down to when you have data, let's say on a small scale, and you want to parse things out of it. So field extraction, or you want to classify it, or you want to transform that data. Maybe go from, a small sentence into a bigger sentence, add some detail. That's the kind of data analysis or data engineering-esque things that you can do with automations. And that's definitely number 3 on the category. And the last one is decision-making. Decision-making, it's interesting because it's our natural human tendency that we don't want to give up control to AI. If I'm deciding whether, in the recruiting context, whether I want to accept or deny this candidate, that's something that, first off, I'm a very empathetic person, so it feels bad if I do that. But also, I don't know if I trust AI yet. And we're kind of at the uncanny valley where trust is a huge factor in no matter what kind of workflow you're building. Trust is probably the number one concern. Because you have to look at what kind of percentile or what kind of percentage risk am I comfortable with. If it messes up 1% of the time, then decision-making, oftentimes you can't do anything there. But if you can get to only mess up 0.1% of the time, some more opportunities open up. Now, decision-making in its broadest form is probably one of the most powerful ones. And at Respell, we don't actually support any decision-making use cases, but it is probably the most asked for after those top 3. And people want to give control to the AI. So as you're building things, experiment. Talk to your users, which one of these 4 or other buckets that it fits into, and see if you can also make decisions for them. Because that's how you actually get past the barriers for a lot of these automations. All right, so this is the abstract stuff. Now let's go into Workflows 101. What are they? How do we use them? Common use cases that we see, and try to get you into the automation mindset. First thing is definitions. Got to set the language at a base understanding. Workflow is multiple steps. Doesn't need to be linear. It can be all kinds of winding paths, but it has specific tasks that I'm all over the place today. Specific tasks that are custom to your business logic. And so this could be, like I said earlier, answering an email. It could be generating content. It may have multiple steps. It could be whatever else you're doing day to day. It's completely dependent on what you, in your context, need. And then there's some input or output or effect. Outputs and effects, maybe it changes something in the system, updates my CRM or my ERP. Or maybe it just gives me some kind of data and sends it to me on Slack or my communication channels. Now, an example that is probably one of the most concrete ones I show to most people is screening a candidate. Very custom to your business, but this is kind of the flow that I go through. I will first look at a resume, and usually it's going to have their personal website or LinkedIn on it. So I'm going to go to those. I'm going to Google search their name, find everything I can about them. I'm going to write some notes, accept or deny, and then send them an email with that result. And if you think about, let's say 3 years ago, how you would have automated this. Well, looking at the resume, we had resume parsers. It would get like the keywords, which is why most resumes have like the skills with a bunch of keywords on them now, is to get past those ATS screeners. And then you'd probably manually have to go Google search their name, look at their LinkedIn, make a decision yourself, write some notes yourself, and then send the email yourself. And you can maybe use a template for that, right? And sometimes your ATS applicant tracking system, by the way, might have that functionality. But now with AI, you can do a lot more. And the last one in there with Red, you could also probably do that. It's just a matter of, again, the trust making, or the trust and the decision making. And I've automated this for Respell, so I know very in depth on that this is possible. And I can say, it's not nice because it saves me time. It's nice because I have other things to focus on. And that's the key thing with automation. It's more than just the time you save with each individual thing. It's about when you combine them all, how many times a day do you get distracted and then have to lose your train of thought and go on to something else? You need to knock out as much as you can in order to stay effective and in control of your time. And so with AI, you can do the research online. Like we have a research agent that just does that for you. You can scan the resume, have AI think and make a decision on it if you want to, have it write some notes if you don't want to make the decision for you. And you also have it send a personalized email back to them. So at least you have the good impression, you get the goodwill. Now, why bother? There's a really great XKCD comic, which I forgot to put in the slides on this. And the x-axis, it's a table with the x-axis on, I believe it's how long something takes you, like each time, and how often that thing happens on the y-axis. And in the table, it shows you how long you can spend on building an automation in order to get ROI. So look it up, just do like XKCD automation after the talk. But my math is that I go through roughly 50 of these a day. And I don't look up and go in depth on each candidate, but it takes roughly like at least a minute or two if I really care about them. And that's about an hour every single day, which does kind of check out with how I do it. So just by going through this, and it took me about, let's say, 2 hours to do, that's 2 days ROI. It felt great. In general, some tips for automation, and this is probably one of the more critical slides in here that might have a takeaway. Whether you're building something for users or whether you're trying to automate something yourself, you need to understand, okay, what's the form and function, so the form factor, the interface you're using, and then also, what kind of AI are we using? Is it focused on research? Is it going to be generating something? Because there's tools for each specific one, and Respell is not going to fit all of them. But you might use Perplexity for research, or you might use ChatGPT for generation. So pick out your right tools because it will save you a lot of pain later. And write down the full process. Like actually get out your pen and paper and write it down. One of the most surprising things to me when I was starting Respell was how most folks don't think about the nitty-gritty details as they're going through these things as they do them. You're thinking about, I ask, let's say, a recruiter, what does your day-to-day look like? They're like, oh, well, I answer emails and I schedule meetings. That's not all they do. They do a lot more than that. And the devil's in the details. And if you want to automate something, you actually have to get them to write it down. You don't want to skip on that part. Time-consuming first. Those are usually the meatiest ones. And I think you might be surprised on what you can do there. And don't be afraid of human in the loop. Decision-making is tough, even for AI. Like sometimes it'll make mistakes, and that can cause you a lot of heartache. So don't be afraid to have a step where it asks you for confirmation or asks you for feedback. And last thing is be aware of limitations. I feel like the rest of the talks here give a pretty good overview on that, especially the last one. Some of the most common use cases we see, and the clinger here is every single function has something you can do. Even engineering, I know the engineers in the audience, you have a lot of power because maybe some of you even got into the industry by being lazy and automating some of your tasks that you were doing on your own, because I was that way. But it's all the other stuff too. Bug reports coming into Slack, you got to deal with that. That doesn't need to be the case. You can automate that part too. So everybody has something to do. And the most common ones we see is for sales, lead management. That's people working with people. Sales is a people function. But before, a year ago, there weren't really good tools for looking up folks and researching them, understanding what they're about and what they're asking you for. And so that's by far probably number one in general for Respell is lead management. Recruitment, same thing. Anything to do with HR, also a people function. Operations, this one's interesting because operations means very different things to different companies, but one of the most asked for and one of the most run spells for Respell is looking at competitive analysis, market mapping, doing general research. So again, in that top bucket, research. And then data analysis. It's actually surprising me how many folks don't realize that one of the things that AI is very good at is going from natural language to another structured language, whether it's SQL, whether it's some proprietary like filter language in Notion or HubSpot or Salesforce. And one of the easiest things for us to do is say, hey, you can query your database with English, or you can query your Salesforce with English, because nobody knows how to use their SOQL language. So those are really quick wins. And if you're looking for something to tinker with, highly recommend natural language to another structured language. All right, so quick thing about Respell. And I'm not going to give you a pitch of things that we've built. We bundle a lot of AI tooling together to make automations really easy to build for any type of function. And we're fairly horizontal at it, whether it's recruiting or HR, sales, operations, even engineering teams. They like to use us. Sometimes it's faster than writing. And as a result, we've had to stuff like tons of having a customizable editor. That a lot. There's a lot of let you build your own agents. And an agent in this context there's a base model, and then it has access to two things. There's knowledge, so maybe some PDFs or other kinds of files that you pass in as context, and it can refer to those using retrieval augmented generation. And then it also has tools, things that it can affect. So these could also be integrations or other agents as well. And we built a lot of these because we have one that's a research agent that will make Google searches, it'll look at websites, it'll write reports, it'll crawl the web to eventually get as much information about a topic as it can. That is by far the most used block, and it took us like 3 days to build. And we've been iterating on it since, but when we saw that, what we decided was, well, one thing that folks really struggle with is every single integration, whether it's we have on there like Slack, HubSpot, that's a different one at the end. Confluence, Jira, like those are all tools that people don't really want to go into all the time, especially if they're trying to do like a one-off task. And so we built an agent to wrap around those as well. And it's phenomenal for myself, where I never want to spend time in a CRM like HubSpot. They always confuse me. So I'll just ask our tool, hey, can you get me all my contacts that are assigned to me and maybe some to-dos for the day? And it can do that really well. So we built out many of those agents, and part of what we had to do was figure out, how do we templatize this? How do we make sure that we know that they're not going off the rails when we push an update? We have to build an eval system. How do we make sure that they get better over time with feedback? So a lot of the stuff that's there's entire companies dedicated towards, we've gotten maybe 80% of the way there, and some really fascinating technical learnings. We also bundled all those agents into like one chat experience. And this is one of those features that enterprises tend to benefit more from than consumers. But those agents I just talked about, those are all focused on solving problems. If I want to do research, it does research for me. If I want to query messages from Slack, it'll do that for me as well. But the chat experience, that's also an agent of a different type, and that's called the orchestrator. So we have roughly 3 types of agents: or solvers, orchestrators, and evaluators. Orchestrators is the second type, where it takes your user input, just like ChatGPT does, and routes it to the right model or the right other agent to respond. And again, lots of fascinating things there, lots of pitfalls you can go into. If you're building something like that, let me know. I'd love to chat about saving you some time and headache. And then the evaluators should be fairly simple. It's you get an input and you get a response that we gave you from maybe an agent or just a generic model, and we're going to talk to you, or we're going to evaluate whether what it said was correct or not, and use that as automatic feedback. So most of our improvement functionality is automated. We also decided not to build our own recommendation system because we wanted to see how far LLMs could go. So all of our suggestions about workflows to run or tools to use inside a platform are all powered by LLMs at the moment. It's a lot easier to set up, and it was a lot more accurate than we thought it was going to be. So that's a little fun tidbit in case you're doing recommendation engines inside an app. And there's a lot of other things I can talk about, but I think I want to end it here and say, come find me at Q&A to talk about the meaty technical details. Hopefully this was at least a fun intermission, and you learned a little bit about the language on automations. And if I were to say, to take away one thing, it's you can do a lot more than you might think with AI. And the main thing that blocks people is knowing what to do. And so if you spend even an hour a day just saying, this is what I did today, write it down, pen and paper, I think you'll find a lot more opportunities than you might imagine at first. So I'll end my talk there. Thank you. And I'll be, I think, over there.